Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Friday, August the 11th, 2023. I just analysed the horoscope of Vladimir Putin with particular emphasis on the Saturn-Uranus cycle. And Putin's nemesis, supposedly, is the opposition leader Alexei Navalny, and he's often put forward in the West as an alternative president to Putin. You know, people in the West have this fantasy of Putin being overthrown and a brand new pro-Western government emerging, perhaps led by Navalny. Now, Navalny became famous in the West in 2020. When he was the victim of a nerve gas attack on August the 20th, 2020. I think he was in Tomsk, and he nearly died, and he was flown back to, he's flown out of Russia to Germany. He received treatment in Germany, and he recovered, and what did he do? Well, he went back to Russia, where he was promptly arrested and given a prison sentence. And then recently, I think today, yes, we've just heard that his prison sentence has been extended by 19 years. So he's been given another 19 years. So in that sense, things don't look too good for him. So what I wanted to do today is look at Alexei Navalny's horoscope. Want to consider what kind of person he is. I mean, what kind of person would do this? I mean, he is really he's really gone for it, hasn't he? I mean, he didn't have to put himself in this situation he's in, but he's done it anyway. I also want to look at what was going on in August 2020 when he was a victim of this nerve gas attack. He's been the victim of other attacks. I think in 2017, some corrosive substance was thrown at him, and it damaged his eyes, I think. So he is used to it, and he is a Gemini, and he likes talking, and it seems that his words are getting him into trouble, or have got him into trouble. So anyway, let's look at Alexei. Let's look at Alexei Navalny's horoscope. So you can see he's born on June the 4th, 1976. We do have a time of birth for him, 1:30 p.m., and he was born in the town of Putin, which is in close to Moscow, in the Moscow Oblast. So he is a Gemini. You can see Sun in Gemini. He also has a very strong Mercury, in the sense that his Mercury is in Taurus, which is a sign ruled by Venus, and Venus is in Gemini, a sign ruled by Mercury. So he has Mercury and Venus in mutual reception. So that kind of gives him a sort of a Gemini feel to his Mercury, not least because his Mercury is trine his ascendant. So yeah, he's a real Mercury person, and yeah, he talks a lot. He likes to he did, I think, like to make YouTube videos. His most famous YouTube video, I think, was all about Vladimir Putin's house or mansion or massive complex. I mean, it was an amazing video, and it really put Putin in a very bad light. It showed how perhaps completely divorced Putin was from the Russian people, with the total opulence in which he was living. And so I'm guessing that by making that video, he really didn't do himself any favors. Maybe he made himself a marked man. So that's his Mercury. A very strong Mercury, I think, and a Mercury that just can't help itself. It has to communicate. And when you look at the shape of his chart, all the 7 traditional planets, Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, they're all above the horizon. The only planets he's got below the horizon are the generational planets of Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. So when you've got someone who's got all their planets above the horizon like this, they want to be seen. So he's got into politics. He needs to communicate. His public life is very important to him. Even when he's been in prison, he still is able to communicate. We still get an idea about what he thinks, and making a video about Putin's living arrangements would be perfect for having all that stuff above the horizon. And when he goes to Germany, when having nearly been killed, you would have thought he'd think, well, okay, enough is enough. But no, he comes straight back to Russia as soon as he can, as soon as he's well enough to, and he gets arrested. It's like he wanted to be relevant. He wanted to be a public figure, and he perhaps felt that if he was stuck in Germany, he couldn't be a public figure. And so I think we're really seeing how those planets south on above the horizon are working. Now his Mercury has got one thing wrong with it. Or one thing that could be problematic. That Mercury is on a fixed star, and that fixed star is Caput Algol, which means head of the demon. Algol, Algol, I believe comes from the Arabic al-Ghul. The English word ghoul, ghosts and ghouls and all that kind of stuff, I believe has an Arabic origin, and so it comes from that, the head of the demon. So when I think it was Perseus cut the Gorgon's head off, Medusa, remember he held her head up. I remember that head covered, the hair was snakes. That is in the sky. That is the head of the demon. And he's got his Mercury on there. And it seems to me that through his communication, he is attracting fairly horrible experiences. I don't know about the disfigurement. It is true that he got corrosive stuff thrown in his face in 2017. So that has happened. I suppose the nerve gas attack, I don't know if that's disfiguring. But it's attracting poison. It's pretty poisonous, and I think that Mercury on Algol is a problem for him. Now, for most people, Mercury on Algol would not be a problem. But if you are an opposition politician in Russia who likes to communicate, having Mercury on Algol could be a big problem. Disfigurement might also be suggested by the Sun-Venus conjunction in Gemini that he has. Before I've talked about the Sun-Venus conjunction, for men perhaps treating women badly, for women being treated badly by the men in their life. But there is another way of looking at it. Venus is the way one looks. And so if you've got Sun conjunct Venus, your looks could be damaged by something. And so that kind of echoes the Mercury on Algol theme. So what I also wanted to do was compare Alexei Navalny's chart with that of Vladimir Putin. So here is Vladimir Putin's chart. Remember, we don't have a time of birth, and we will put those two charts, the chart of Putin and Navalny, on the same wheel. We'll put Putin in the middle, and we will put Navalny on the outer ring, and we get that. Now, Navalny had made this video about Putin's home, albeit a very extravagant home. So you could say, that's Putin's Venus in Scorpio, his lair, his comfort zone. And Navalny's Mars, 10 Leo, is square Putin's Venus. So there is the aggravation. I suspect that action of putting up that video really annoyed Putin. Also, Putin has his Mars semi-square his Venus. That means that Navalny's Mars makes a wide semi-square 135-degree aspect to Putin's Mars. So there's plenty of scope for bad feeling between the two men. And Putin is the man with the power, was the man with the power, and maybe that was not a wise thing for Navalny to do. Now, as far as the poisoning is concerned, it took place on August the 20th, 2020. So here's the chart for the day. I don't know what time. Maybe I could have found out. I think it was in his hotel room. It probably happened earlier than this, the poisoning. I went for noon. I went for noon on August the 20th, 2020, but it was probably earlier in the morning. But I haven't. Forget the ascendant and the house cusps. The point is that the poisoning, there was a Mars-Saturn square. You know, the death pair were certainly configured there. So that might be indicative. But what I'm really interested in is how the planets at the time of the poisoning interacted with those with the planets in Navalny's chart. So let's create a wheel. So we're going to put Navalny in the middle. We'll put the poisoning on the outer ring. So we see that Uranus at the time of the poisoning was at 1041 Taurus, and Navalny's Mars was at 1046 Taurus. So that meant that Uranus was exactly square Navalny's Mars. Now, when we think about poisoning, we usually think in terms of Neptune, but it doesn't really seem to be a Neptune issue. It's more about just Uranus. Just Uranus is the Novichok hitting his Mars, and so that's what's causing all the damage. So that's one aspect of it. As far as solar arc directions are concerned, so this is when we move every single planet 1 degree per year. So Navalny at the time of the poisoning would have been about 44. So we move every planet in his chart 44 degrees. So looking at the solar arc directions, those are the solar arc directions, looking at comparing it with the progress chart. So we see that the progressed ascendant, the solar arc directed ascendant, is at 10 Scorpio, and the solar arc directed midheaven is at 9 Leo. So directed midheaven in Leo is pretty close to his Mars, and the ascendant likewise is very close to his Mars. So that might have had something to do with it, though I'm thinking the solar arc directions are really indicating the overall trouble that he's getting himself into. The poisoning was just one aspect of it, because, you know, the following year, I mean, less than 6 months after the poisoning, I think the poisoning happened in August. In January, he went back to Moscow and he got arrested and sent to prison. So the ascendant and the midheaven could really be associated with this disastrous situation he was getting himself into. And then there is Navalny's solar return. This solar return is here. The reason I put it in Navalny M. I've set this solar return for Moscow. Reason being because this program I've got causes trouble when I put in his birthplace, because I had to enter the coordinates manually for the birth date, and solar returns don't seem to work with manually entered data. But it's not going to be his solar return set for his birthplace, Putin, and for Moscow. It's not going to make a big difference. So what's interesting about this solar return is there is an exact Sun-Venus conjunction in his solar return. This is set for June 4th, 2020. So this was the year he got poisoned, went to Berlin for treatment, went back to Russia, got arrested, where everything fell apart for him. So this is the solar return. So look at that Sun-Venus conjunction, exact Sun-Venus conjunction. And going back to his natal chart, that he's got his Sun-Venus conjunction in his own chart. So it's a repeated signature. Obviously, the Sun will always stay the same, but Venus does move around the Sun. So I think this emphasizes the fact that the Sun-Venus conjunction is actually unfortunate. It was always a vulnerability, him having his Sun-Venus conjunction in his natal chart. Solar return, exact Sun-Venus conjunction, that talks about the vulnerability. And then we look at Mars. Mars is at 14 degrees Pisces. So at the solar return, Mars was square his Sun-Venus conjunction. So I think that was a pretty bad solar return, having Mars square the Sun-Venus. Of course, it's not the whole story. If he'd led a quiet life, if he hadn't have been so frantic to be in the public eye, things might not have been so bad. Now, one point I want to make about Navalny's chart is in terms of the difference between the Placidus and the whole sign house systems. So if you take a whole sign house system, you look at what's on the ascendant, and you say, well, that covers the whole first house. So you would say, oh, well, the moon has got to be in the first house because it's in the same sign as the ascendant. But Placidus would say, well, that moon is in the 12th house. Now, it looks as if he's going to be spending a lot of time in prison, and you associate the 12th house with prison. So you might say, well, that would fit with the moon being in the 12th. So Placidus has it. Placidus would seem to be more descriptive of what's going on in his life than the whole sign house. Also, Saturn earlier this year moved into Pisces, so he's got Saturn opposition the moon. So it's kind of not surprising that the full potential of that moon in the 12th house is starting to reveal itself. Now, if you were an advocate of whole house of the whole sign system, you might say, well, his birth time is given at 1:30. That is suspiciously rounded. Maybe he was born a bit later. So if he was born probably 10-15 minutes later, more like 1:45, then his ascendant would move into Libra, and so from a whole sign perspective, you could then say his moon was in the 12th. So house systems may be quite important when looking at Alexei Navalny's horoscope, and yes, at 1:30 p.m. is rather too exact. I want to finish by looking very quickly at Navalny's Vedic chart. So here is his Vedic chart. So in his Vedic chart, he has something called the Kala Sarpa Yoga. Now, the Kala Sarpa Yoga takes place when all of the planets are between the north node and the south node. So you see there's the south node, there's the north node, and all of the planets are on one side of this axis. So Kala Sarpa, I believe, means time of the snake. And so he was born under this yoga. It's comparatively rare. It's not totally rare. I mean, I've got Kala Sarpa yoga, but it's not particularly common. And so if you have Kala Sarpa yoga, it does mean that your life is in some way fated. So he may have been motivated to do what he did by the fact that he was born with Kala Sarpa yoga. You know, any normal person would perhaps not have gone back to Russia once they were if they were recovering in a Berlin hospital from nerve gas poisoning, potentially inflicted by agents of the Russian government. But maybe because of his Kala Sarpa yoga, he felt compelled to go back. At some level, he had no choice. This is what he had to do. As far as his dashas are concerned, the periods of life, you know, at the end of 2022, the end of last year, he entered his Rahu dasha, and as far as I know, nothing much has changed. He's just been given an extra 19 years in prison. In 2025, he moves into his Rahu Mahadasha, main period, and his Jupiter Subdasha. I'm wondering how fortunate that's really going to be, because he's got Rahu opposition Jupiter. I don't know. I'm not very encouraged by his Vedic chart in terms of his future. I mean, I know logically his future doesn't look good, and I know people in the West are hoping that somehow Putin can be overthrown and he can take over from Putin. But I'm not sure. I don't think that's going to happen. So I don't know. Navalny is probably, as I said, just being propelled by this Kala Sarpa yoga to do things which may actually be pointless. I mean, I know in the West he's seen as a hero, but looking at his horoscope and looking at both horoscopes, I'm kind of worried that all his sacrifices are actually going to be for nothing, and that perhaps he should do what he can to appease Putin and get out of prison and get to safety, because he's not going to take over from Putin. It's not going to happen. I know he feels very strongly about what he's doing, but I really think that I think it's a waste of time. Russia is not going to suddenly embrace him, and I think that the war with Ukraine has just confirmed that. So those are my views on Alexei Navalny. Sorry to end on a somewhat negative note.